So aside from being a carjacking, hooker-bashing sociopath who gets off by ripping out people's hearts all the while throwing fireballs at passing police cars, every election year I am also reminded by federal lawmakers that apparently I'm some sort of antisocial introvert whose only interaction with other people comes in the form of online trolling, and hence is in desperate need to be reformed institutionally, ideally via waterboarding. Now I personally got no clue why any politician would be so overly concerned about a basement-dwelling panda bringing about the apocalypse like the second coming of Christ, but I suppose it doesn't hurt to play it safe, which is why in this episode I decided to review Haven, a harmless indie title by French developer The Game Bakers, featuring a gender-ambiguous couple who loves each other so oobly-woobly much. I mean, come on, it's not like the French ever had a history of inciting civil unrest or offending any political groups, am I right? Oh wait. Our story follows the adventures of Kay and Yu, your everyday relatable gender-bending couple on the run from the apiary, a spacefaring culture whose entire civilization happens to be structured around pushing hardline conservative marriage policies, as well as brainwashing dissidents and plundering other planets for resources. So yeah, the political commentary isn't so much on the nose as much as it is a hot frying pan to the face. And while I know this might sound like an interesting premise for a decent science fiction story, the writers make no attempt to utilize any of these ideas to tell a wider story, and seems more than content to just focus on the romance between the two lovebirds, all the while leaving much of the interesting world-building elements awkwardly hanging in the background like the camera crew in a sex film, which is quite a shame because there was actually quite a lot of material to work with, everything from the daily struggles of the apiary, to the way that society functioned as a whole, to how people dodge paying parking fines, etc. Blimey, it's too bad there weren't any developers around to make a video game of it, LOL. Anyways, our horny heroes find themselves stranded on an abandoned planet with the birds and the bees, and must now pad out the rest of the game time by rummaging the place for food, spare parts, and above all else, reasons to fuck each other's brains out. You know how every young couple during their honeymoon phase would shamelessly frisk each other in public just to get the people around them to flee for their sanity, all the while chewing their faces off? Or is that just me and my awkward first dates? Well, regardless, this is pretty much just that, only dialed up to 11, so presumably if there were any intelligent alien life nearby, then the neighboring planets can soon expect a refugee crisis. I suppose I could have picked a slightly less cheesy dialogue option, but truth be told, the conversation choices didn't really amount to anything, and was only there to establish which of the two was the clinging one of the pair. However, I did roll my eyes every time the characters would start spouting technobabble to coyly dance around finding a science fiction solution to any of their problems, as by that point I realized we were dealing with science so soft it could have been recycled for toilet paper. Like seriously developers, just hire a decent science fiction writer. I know there are plenty available because nobody else is hiring them. Now I know I usually don't take this long to talk about gameplay, but frankly I'm still not sure exactly what the developers were going for here, as the game is crammed so full of ideas it could be mistaken for the complaints box at Disneyland. You can spend your time turning any junk you find into various snacks, meals or psychedelics, though you probably won't, as both our protagonists can go for months without food or water, something of which I had to find out the hard way after wasting countless of hours remaining idle with the hopes of seeing if one of them would resort to cannibalism. So yeah, either our characters can survive off sex alone, or nobody on the development team remembered to implement any survival mechanics. Alternatively, you could just glide around the planet on your jet fuel powered rocket boots and take in the scenery, though you probably won't do that either, partly because the gliding handles like a shopping cart being pushed down a ski trail, but mostly because the world map was subdivided by several dozen loading screens. Not quite sure if this was due to the developers being too economical with the game engine, or if the planet's previous inhabitants went a little overboard trying to combat casual speeding. And finally, if neither of the former were to your liking, you could just take out your boredom on the local wildlife, but this being a family-friendly game with themes of sex and totalitarianism means that the game only allows you to pacify your enemies as opposed to add them to the local McDonald's menu. And while the combat doesn't overstay its welcome, it does water everything down until you're left with just two different flavors of attacks. Combining this with the fact that the map generates more enemies than a Hitler impression during a Veterans Day parade means that you'll quickly find yourself dreaming up ways to start carpet bombing the place as an alternative to therapy. So yeah, the gameplay was handled like a blind waiter serving you coffee. It certainly doesn't help that every time we are back in the hub area, the player is portrayed as some sort of creepy unseen third character who's just hanging about looking to get in on some of the sweet action. But I think the bulk of my complaints is reserved towards the game's final act, whereupon we are introduced to the story's antagonist in the form of Yu's psychotic prearranged husband, who is so stupidly evil for no better reason than because somebody had to be, and whose personality he comes across as a Harvey Weinstein impression performed by Charles Manson. Now, one might think that given the large variety of mechanics, the game would be building itself up for quite a final challenge, possibly involving a race around the planet with blackjack and strippers. But no, the game's ending ultimately just boils down to which one of these two slideshows would you rather watch, so presumably all that gameplay we went through earlier was effectively just us knobbing around for 10 hours. Perhaps I'm being a bit too harsh, as the game definitely has some merits. The light banter between the characters is certainly adorable and does a good job of capturing the euphoria of the early moments in a relationship. It's just a shame nobody had the time to explain to these developers how to make a video game. Like, for Christ's sakes, build your story around the gameplay. Doesn't matter what the core mechanics are, it could be based off not fighting in bed for all I care, as long as the gameplay complements the writing. Also, if your story is going to be entirely focused on the relationship between your protagonists, then make sure you are constantly testing the strength of their bond. Like, introduce conflict between them, and maybe even commit several hours of them apart from each other just to grow on their own and self-reflect before returning to rekindle their love. Just like what you expect in, oh, I don't know, a real relationship. It's how we separate the keepers from the gold diggers.